Thank you for joining today's webinar featuring Stiles Construction. Today's session will cover how Stiles Construction is combining 2D plus 3D for an improved workflow. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Tim Kelly, Product Manager at Assemble. Go ahead, Tim.
So today, just a real quick overview. Kris and I are going to introduce ourselves and the organizations for those of you unfamiliar with Assemble or Stiles. And then the bulk of today is going to be about our most recent release, 2D SmartSheets, and what that offers, the workflows within Assemble. Just to introduce myself really quick, I'm Tim Kelly, Product Manager at Assemble Systems, and I actually come from the construction industry and commercial construction, part of a general contractor that did a lot of education work and aviation. And in my role in construction, I worked both in pre-con and in the field, and ultimately implemented a number of tools, including Assemble. I'll get into some of the use cases I have for SmartSheets when I was in the field, but first I'm going to go ahead and let Kris introduce himself.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it. Kris Lengieza, I'm the Director of Virtual Design and Construction at Stiles Construction down here in Fort Lauderdale. So we're a medium-sized general contractor, touch a little bit of everything. And I'm glad that Tim asked me to come on today and talk a little about the 2D, 3D integration that they developed, because it's something that I think is really going to help a lot with our estimators and our teams in the field, really kind of link between the information that they're getting in their contract documents, those 2D PDFs, and the 3D models that we're getting out of, Revit and Tekla and other softwares like that. But I'll let Tim get back and tell you a little bit about his story on why 2D was so important from his perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to start, a high level of what Assemble is. Assemble Insight is our core product, and it is a cloud-based data management system where your team is able to publish models, organize and consume that data, manage the information across all of your project files, and share that to team members that typically don't have access to BIM in general. With the idea that a lot of BIM tools today are very heavy desktop-based tools, and our product allows you to get that information off of that desktop and out to the rest of your team members through a lightweight web browser. So, hey, Kris, I think before I dig into some of the 2D, go ahead and share a bit about what Stiles does and how you guys use Assemble and other products to manage your construction work.
Sure, absolutely. So like I said, we're a mid-sized general contractor, but we're also a little bit more than that. We pretty much can handle anything as part of the develop, build, design, construct, and manage process, from buying you a piece of dirt to tearing the building down at the end and then selling that piece of dirt for you. So we touch a lot of different aspects of the AEC industry, and having in-house design folks that work in our architecture group along with our own development group gives us an interesting perspective on things. So, for us, we are always looking for a way to streamline our efforts, get more information into the hands of our pre-construction team to be able to give, more rapid updates to budgets, better estimates that, will make sure that, our performers are good. And we do also do about, 75 to 80% of our work is for third-party clients as well. So we're not just working for ourselves, so we have to hold ourselves accountable with numbers that we put out on the street, and some of the work we do is hard bid and some of the work we do is negotiated. So we have a lot of different scenarios that we get into from a pre-construction department and a VDC department. And we chose Assemble for exactly the reasons that Tim mentioned. We didn't want to have to buy expensive hardware for everybody. We wanted to kind of unlock the power of the model for everyone in our office. And the way that Assemble is set up, where we can load projects into that and then pretty much distribute it to an unlimited number of users within our office, in our development group, within our architecture team, and use it as a tool to communicate back and forth between our estimators, the owner, showing them examples of how the design has changed, where the costs are coming from as we do budget reviews, has been extremely beneficial to us on many projects.
Jumping into our most recent release, which was a lot of things We updated our 3D viewer. We now provide the ability to publish and manage connected drawings back to your model and your data. And I want to start with kind of the concept at a high level. I remember a number of times, both in the field and working with estimators that weren't familiar or exposed to Revit or BIM in general, and the fact that the drawings were generated by the model was a foreign concept, and explaining that the line work on the piece of paper is there because someone put a wall in the model, there just wasn't that connection. And when we built this and went through the process of allowing our users to make this dynamic relationship, when we publish this information out of Revit, it's all connected, where I can click on a wall in the drawing and it shows me the object in 3D, or vice versa, select things in 3D and it shows me those in 2D. I think it takes that explanation, that need away. It's there. You understand that that's one and the same. It's that same object. And I think for new users and exposing people to what BIM offers and the data that you have in 3D, and behind that, the information, the metadata, as well as the information that the design team puts on those pieces of paper, that's all needed for project management. And you have to have both. And the ability to navigate from a high level of data, or a chunk of information, right down to the sections and the details and the general notes on the paper, and then right back out, allows you to consume project information much more quickly and ultimately drive decisions. So the navigation for us, and that Kris is going to dive into, is all about keeping those things connected and having a single uniform data set, whether you're looking at 2D plans and drawings, or the 3D model and the data connected there. So Kris, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I know you have a couple of different workflows to go through, so I want to make sure you have time to do so. So why don't you jump right in?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add on to one thing that Tim said, I'm pretty sure that all of us are contractually obligated by what comes out on those 2D drawings or those PDFs. So there was always a disconnect between our estimators. Even if we were getting the quantities from the model and they were helping us, there was still kind of this thought that, well, that's really not what our contract is based upon. And like Tim said, the explaining that those 2D drawings came from that 3D model was a hurdle to get over. So now being able for them to actually see visually how they are connected by selecting one item on one side in the model and having it show up in 2D on the plan, and that is the same element in both the 2D and the 3D, will really help drive that buy-in, that those things are coming from exactly the same place. So as Tim said, the part of the new rollout between 2D and 3D is really this idea that it is an intuitive connection between both the 2D plans, which you're seeing on the right-hand side here, and the 3D model on the left. And if you can see that there's a wall that was drawn in, goes many stories in the building of this apartment tower, and it is saying, hey, this is where that wall shows up on the 5th floor. Now, if I was doing Takeoff traditionally on a 2D set of plans, I would have to take this wall off maybe 4 or 5 times because it repeats itself over 5 different levels. Because it is one in the model, once I select the model, I've taken all 5 of those levels, that wall off for every level automatically. The other thing that's really nice about this is, it shows you every sheet that shows up on. So if that element shows up on, those 5 different levels, it'll highlight those 5 different floor plans that that element shows up on. The next thing is that we can not just take things and select them in 3D anymore. We can actually select those smart elements in 3D as well. So you can see on the right-hand side here that I've gone ahead and basically just drawn a bounding box around this entire sheet. And everything that's been highlighted in blue are the elements that are smart elements that are tied to the model, that are highlighted in my quantity boxes over on the left, that I've selected. Now you can see things like grid lines and elevations and dimensions don't get selected because they're not model elements. They don't have quantities that are associated with them. So what's important to know here is that you're only getting the information that you need, only the things that you actually want to quantify, not grabbing every single element like you would if you were trying to do it in a CAD file, and having to select between all those hatch areas and all the grid lines and the levels and things that are associated with the CAD file as well.
And Kris, one quick add on that is a couple of things. I just want to make sure it's clear and kind of communicate that there might be a question of, well, how long did it take you to connect those things? And his word there was intuitive. It's actually happening during the publish process. So when we consume this information, it's already there for you. So there's no manual create relationships. They're pre-built. It's part of that process. And then the second thing is, Kris talked a bit about what's selectable and what can you grab on the 2D sheets. And that actually also directly ties to the ability in Assemble to group, sort, and filter your information, in that if you're only interested in being able to select the walls within 2D sheets, you can filter the model and the data there down to just the category walls, and that's all that's clickable then in the sheets. So then you draw your bounding box, as Kris mentioned, around the whole thing, and everything's ignored except for the walls that you want to work with.
Everything is linked between these two elements, and as I mentioned before, I can select, for example, this grill that is covering up the parking garage on this building, and have Assemble tell me all of the sheets that shows up on. It may show up in multiple elevations. It may show up in multiple sections. It may show up in a detail sheet. And the beauty of that is I've taken it off on all of those sheets, and I don't have to worry about double counting anymore. Because where it may have been a little bit more difficult in the past to discern is if that was exactly the same grill that I was seeing in the elevation that's now shown in this section, that's now shown also on a more 3D perspective view. Now we know that it's exactly that same grill shown in each one of those sheets. So, much like we've done for a while in colorizing our model elements in a 3D environment to either designate that they've been taken off, separate them out by bid groups, break the model down in a way that's visually understandable without having to necessarily dive into the data, we can do that same thing, and it's associated with our 2D documents as well. So you can see on the left here that I've selected all of my railings, and I've basically highlighted them in that lovely magenta color that everybody loves to use. And you can see that on our 2D set of drawings that they're also turning that same magenta color as well. So there's continuity that happens between both the 3D and the 2D elements across both viewers. So you know that whenever you see that magenta element, whether it just looks like some lines that are on this balcony in the 2D, you know that it is that actual 3D railing family that you have a length that you can automatically take off for it. So how is this going to change our workflow? Well, one of the things that I think it does is it mimics our more traditional takeoff process of taking off in 2D. People who are very comfortable taking off in 2D, I think will become even more comfortable using Assemble now, because the elements that they're used to looking for on a sheet, they'll now be able to see on a sheet, they'll be able to select on a sheet, and they'll also be able to see where that element falls in the model as well. So if they want to start with the 2D because that's what they're comfortable, they can start with the 2D, start selecting elements there, and then go ahead and see how that is affected in 3D. If people have made the shift already over to the 3D side of things and want to start doing their takeoff using the 3D, vice versa, they'll also have the ability to see where those elements were showing up on sheets, maybe to communicate to subcontractors, maybe to communicate to team members on exactly what you're looking at and where you found that information. As I mentioned before, it pretty much eliminates double counting that was associated with a traditional 2D takeoff process. That was pretty much eliminated with any 3D type of takeoff. It made it very difficult to double count, but even more so now that it's tied to the 2D documents, because you can actually see every instance that is shown on a sheet. It puts all of our 3D elements in context. we now have something relatable to a contract document that we can share with other team members who may not be in the model with us, that they'll understand what it is that we're actually looking at. The other thing that's really interesting about this is we can use the data that's associated with the model elements to augment missing information that may not have been tagged for a wall specifically. So for example, we go through and we're taking off walls in a building, and maybe they have not necessarily tagged everything as a fire-rated wall that maybe is built with a fire-rated wall in the model. Now this may allow us to either bring up an RFI or a question to get some clarification on that, and I've even heard some architects in the past say, well, I don't like to put too many tags on my drawings, it makes my drawing look messy. But sometimes there's just not enough information for us to know what wall type that is, and now because we have the data associated with the model element, we now also know what it is in 2D as well. And as I mentioned a few times and kind of driving this point back home, it really does link that model to the contract documents. Until we actually start to get models as contract deliverables, those 2D drawings that are generated out of the model are still our contract documents. So there's a level of understanding and a level of security and kind of a feel-good feeling that we are taking off of what is our actual contract. All right, well, let's dive in and take a look and see what we have here. And I'll kind of take you guys through the new viewer and where you'll find some of these elements after you've published your models. So as Tim has mentioned before, when you go and publish your model with the, make sure you download the new plugin for Assemble if you're already an Assemble user, you're going to get an option to publish sheets. There are 3 options now. You can choose not to publish sheets at all. You can choose to publish all the sheets in the Revit model, or you can choose to publish a set of Revit sheets in your model. If you don't know which one to do, publish them all. It's a pretty safe bet there, and that'll make sure that you'll get a copy of every sheet that was in the Revit file into your Assemble model. So how do we go about actually seeing those sheets once we're into the model? So I've dove into a project here. You can see that I've got my structural model all set up. Here we go. And I want to start taking a look at the sheets. You'll notice on the right-hand side now, you're seeing a new set of icons. You now have a Sheets icon, which will go ahead and open up your Sheet Viewing tab. Now within that tab, you have a few different things that you can do. One of the things is pull up a list of all of the sheets that were published as part of the project. As you can see, I have architectural, I have mechanical, I have some structurals, and so on and so forth. I'm just going to go ahead and dive into a foundation plan here. You can see that as I click on that, it's going to actually open up that sheet for us on the side here. Now, if I want to actually go ahead and pin this so that I always have the sheet list open to it, I can do that as well. I'm going to go ahead and shrink this down and actually get rid of my grid, give myself a little bit more room. And you'll see that I can zoom in and zoom out on sheets just like I would in traditional PDF. I can go ahead and, like I said, use my bounding boxes to select elements. You can see that I just selected the shear wall here. I have one element selected up here. Now if I have it in my grid, I'll pop that up and you can see that the element that I've selected is right here highlighted. So pretty easy just to use your bounding boxes the same way you would in 3D. You can also see which sheets that specific wall shows up on. So now I have a selected element. I can use this selected tab. And this is all of the sheets that referenced wall is showing up on. So you're seeing that it shows up on 10 or 12 different sheets, which is good to know because we may have accidentally, counted this twice in the past. Now we don't necessarily have to worry about that. There is also a search function, so if you want to search through sheets for something specifically, like I'm looking for something for the second floor, I can go and just start in a second. It starts to filter the list automatically. One couple other things here, we do have the ability to toggle on and off overrides. So I'm going to turn on my color overrides here and zoom back out a bit, and you'll start to see that some of my elements that I've already taken off have been colorized based on the colors that I selected when I was doing my bid packaging. Down the bottom, we have our zoom in and zoom out. And this is also a focus button. So this will zoom extents either of the entire model, or if we have something that is selected, for example, these walls here, let me close my properties. I can go ahead and hit that button and it will zoom me to an extents view that has all of those things highlighted inside of it. Okay, and then we can zoom out to fit the whole page to the view as well. So that's the new 2D viewer. Now let's go ahead and flip over and turn on our 3D viewer here. Now ideally, probably when I'd be working on this, I'd be working on multiple screens, but multiple screens don't necessarily always show up the best on a webinar. So I apologize for things being a little bit too small. So now I've gone ahead and I've turned on my 3D as well. I'm going to turn off my grid here. And one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to that wall that I selected here, the shear wall that's inside of here. And I want to know where exactly that is in my 3D model. So I'm just going to make sure that it's selected real quick here and go ahead and grab that again. I can go ahead and zoom in on that element. Now I'm not seeing too much right now because I'm being blocked out by some other walls. But if I toggle on my X-ray mode, there it is. There's that wall that I selected that was on my first floor here. And you can see that there's kind of this continuous involvement between both the architecture or the model and the 2D, and that they're very well tied together, and that I'm interacting with both of them at the same time. Let's go ahead and say that I actually want to change my selection. I'm going to select this concrete floor. I'm going to go back to my model here and, okay, well, here's all the sheets that concrete floor shows up on. So let me jump to one of those and then see, well, where exactly is it that I selected? Okay, so this is what I'm referencing here. Here's that concrete floor that I'm seeing on those floor plans because that's where it's showing up on that sheet. Okay. So also in the 3D viewer, I'll mention that we do have the same toggle overrides of color elements. Here I'm going to turn off my my color overrides here and zoom back out. You can see that I have this, I have this lovely rainbow of colors that I've colorized my model on based on the bid packages that I've put things in. Really no meaning to the colors other than I just want to differentiate between different things, and I know what those colors mean. So for example, all the things in orange relate to my structural steel model, or my structural steel package. All the things in yellow are my precast package. Gray is concrete, the magenta is foundations, and so on and so forth. So I can quickly view the model from kind of a high level and see exactly where these pieces and parts are. Now I will jump over and show you a little bit more about a couple of new features in the 3D viewer, which I think are really interesting, which is the ability to turn on and off sectioning. So you can now go ahead and section your model in 6 different directions, top and bottom in the Z axis, left and right in your Y, and then from the other way on your X axis. So you can turn the planes on and off so you can see where they are and actually adjust those cut planes. So I'm adjusting that cut plane up and down here. I'm going to shrink that down a little bit further so I can see kind of my MEP that's here. We turn those planes off because I want to actually dive in here and take a little bit of a look at what my MEP is looking like. Now, this probably doesn't have as big an implication maybe necessarily at Takeoff right away, but you know, being a Procore user that we are, we also have the Assemble integration built into our Procore system. So what's really great about that for us is now we're going to start publishing our models with our fully coordinated model to Assemble, and then we can view that right within Procore. Our users never have to leave Procore. They can actually do a model view, cut sections, and find all the information they need by level. Also be able to turn things on and off just like they would, kind of without the need to install another piece of software. You can go all the way from just cutting a section at the top and bottom to actually cutting it in pretty much any direction you may want to the point where you actually are creating yourself a nice little box here. And I'm going to go ahead and pull this side in here, kind of slide this section in. Let's say we're just trying to look at maybe the lobby of this building here. And then I'll turn those back off. So now I have a pretty good view of the inside of the lobby of this building, the showroom of this car dealership we're working on. And you can see that you can slide those in and out. Feature on this here, I'm going to turn the sectioning off a little bit, is what if we want to kind of look inside of our model a little bit better? One of the things that we can do is we can go ahead and actually explode our model. So we can use the explode function, and as we pull it away from each other, the pieces begin to separate. for us. You know, I'm doing this with the entire model right now, and this actually looks kind of cool because it's a precast building, so all these little pieces of precast are actually starting to explode away from the model, and I can see how they all interact with each other. In the future, Tim promises me that I'll be able to actually focus on a specific element and actually be able to explode from that point. So I'm looking forward to that in version 2 of the explode function. So let me go into a couple of the workflows on how we use this and why this 2 to 3D is becoming more important for us. So as I had mentioned, we tend to classify a lot of our models into bid packages, okay? And one of the things that we always want to see is, you know, have we taken off kind of the whole model of whatever we have. So you can see that we have some things that are actually not assigned to a bid package here. And traditionally, you know, this is, okay, we've got a door opening, some railings, and so on and so forth. And the way that we do this is we do this in a view where we actually have everything disappear as we drop it into these buckets. So I'm going to switch over to that view. Okay, and now I've got my 2D and my 3D here. So what you can see is you got these little pieces that we have left that have not been taken off. You can see my views called not taken off. I've only got a few things left in here. Everything else has been classified. So I want to kind of figure out what these things are. So I've got these things called haunches. Well, where exactly are these haunches? And as I highlight them, you can see that they're showing up in 3D. Okay, so we have them. There's something that probably have to do with the concrete structure of the building, but I'm still not quite getting where they are in the building, right? So I'm going to come over here and, well, let me see. Here's all the sheets that these are associated with. Okay, going to the selected here. I'm going to take a look at this framing plan because it tells me it shows up on there. I'm going to zoom in. Okay, well, now I can see exactly where those haunches are in the building. And I can zoom in a little bit more on that. We can see that there's a note for the precaster. The precaster has to design a corbel here for them to be able to support this steel that's here. Now that would have been really tough to take off, probably even more difficult to take off in 3D, probably because it's just a little piece that hangs out somewhere, so selecting it and know exactly where it's going is probably, but now I have a much better understanding of exactly what's happening here in this. You know, the other thing that I'll notice is they're at 2 different levels, okay? So I've got a level 3 right here that I'm looking at this drawing, so let's go down and take a look at level 2. I'm going to drive into level 2 here, and, you know, it's showing, it's not the best view here. Let's find the right one. Here we go. So we're going to drive into that same area there, and this is that same area from the second floor, and I'm zooming in, and I've got what those are highlighted there. Can see them. Here's another one highlighted down here that are showing up on the second floor, but there's no note on this level. It's not telling me what those things are. I probably would have missed that in 2D. So let's take a look at the sections. So let's go dive into S9.3 here, and I can see exactly what that's showing me. So here we go. So here's that haunch, that detail, and I've got it selected, and the 3D element has highlighted in 2D as well. So now I have a really good knowledge of exactly what's happening on both level 2 and 3. We have to make sure that we have a haunch to catch the steel beams that are going to create the deck there for our mechanical equipment to sit on. Something that might have been missed, you know, not necessarily from a takeoff perspective, but probably from at least a coordination standpoint would have been a little bit difficult to find. So we figured out what those are. What are some of these other things that are sitting here? So I've got this long, skinny looking sphere. It's a structural framing member. And I got a couple over here as well, so I'm going to grab those. So I've got these HC beams, inverted beams, and I don't know exactly where they show up, right? So the one thing that's interesting about this, and I've gone to selected here, and they don't show up on any sheet. So I'm not exactly sure what they are. Where are those things? What do they do? How do they tie into anything? And this is something that I could probably see happening more often than not, is something is drawn in 3D but never gets onto a plan because it's above a cut elevation or outside of a crop box or something like that that doesn't make it onto a sheet. So the real question is, do we need that thing? What is it for? We can ask an RFI now, and we can figure out exactly what that might be related to and whether or not it's important for us to have or understand. We actually had a job that we did that had some steel that never made it onto the 2D sheets but was in the model. And we were able to actually catch a couple of those steel elements so that we could identify them, take them off, make sure that they were included in bid packages and shop drawings that had never made it onto a 2D sheet. But because we saw them in 3D, we were actually able to ask that question to the design team.
Yeah, Kris, to jump in there for a second, it's really interesting because we talk a lot about, I know you and I have had this conversation a number of times, but model QA process, and how do you know what quality of model you have, and how do you quickly go through that process so that you know these are reliable quantities, the model is of quality that you can use for that workflow and quantify things from the model. And this allows you to dig into that process really quickly, and as you mentioned, you've now got this view of your not taken off items, and it's essentially a saved set, and until you get more information from the design team and where those things should show up, or maybe a new revision of the drawing, you get a new copy. They've made an adjustment to that bounding box or the scope box, as you mentioned, and now you can check and see, hey, okay, this shows up on the second floor framing plan, and now we can go ahead and take it off. So it really ties back to that QA process of, is the model good or the drawings good? Can I use this information for either takeoff or whatever down the road you want to use that for?
Yeah, absolutely, Tim. I think it's really definitely going to streamline that process. You know, another thing that we tend to always seem to run into is owners and teams want to break the project into parts. And sometimes it's very difficult to do in maybe a 3D environment. Maybe it's only from the second floor up in this area of the building, but the first floor, so you can't just kind of draw a box around the entire 3D. I mean, you can, but it takes a little bit more time. When we start to introduce the 2D into this, it gets a little bit easier. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to isolate, for example, maybe just our concrete was probably a good example here. So we've got all our concrete on this job, and let's say that this portion on the left here is actually a showroom for a car dealership. And this portion in the back here is storage for cars and the parking garage for that dealership, and then the service area underneath that. Okay, so let's say that the owner wanted us to actually split that into 3 separate numbers. He wanted to know how much he was spending on each one of those things. So it would be really kind of tough for me to separate that out in maybe 3D. I could probably come to a top view and do something like this, but I'm not sure that I would get exactly what I wanted. You know, I'm probably going to have overlap and some things like that. So let's change that up. Let's go a little bit more into a 3D view and say that I want the first floor concrete that happens in this garage area to be designated as a location of garage. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to kind of unselect everything here. I'm just going to grab my concrete. I'm going to open up my 2D view. Okay. I'm going to actually close this 3D view. Grab that. For the concrete, I'm going to go down to a first floor plan. So let me get the structural first floor plan here. All right, partial service area. Okay, I got this first floor plan. Okay, so I can already see that all of those things are selected. Okay, so I've selected the whole building and all the concrete here, but I'm going to hide everything else. So I'm just going to be able to select the concrete now. All right, and then I'm going to do that bounding box, right? So this is all service area, right? So we're going to grab all of this stuff here. And you can see that I've only selected the elements that are showing up on this page of the concrete here. So I could go ahead, assign that a location of the service area. So I'm just going to switch my view here, and I'm going to go ahead and grab and only show the things that are service now. And I'm going to go ahead and turn everything else off again. And you can see that now I've isolated all that concrete that only had to do with that service area there. There's some, there's basically a slab and some other things that were showing up on that first floor plan. So it gives me a way of kind of using the 2D, which might be a little bit easier to select elements on, to go ahead and grab things in a geographic region and use them interchangeably across both environments so that I can get a much more granular level of selection on those 2D and 3D documents. So that's another good portion of the workflow that we really like. The other one is probably going the other way and finding out what things, basically starting and doing a takeoff all off the 2D drawings to see what elements are only shown in the model, and then going kind of vice versa, what things are not actually shown on any sheets. So it's pretty good for us on both directions, and the way that those two things are going to work together are really, really handy. The one thing I didn't show you in live was how the things are changes color when they are in 2D as well. You can see down here, these are some foundations that I've selected. I'm going to go back and let me just go back into that bid package real quick. So you can see all my foundations here are highlighted in magenta. So as I turn on my 3D model and I look at things from the bottom, you can see all my foundations are in magenta here. And then if I go ahead and I take a look at a foundation drawing, so that they will colorize, and there they are selected. And now when I turn on my colors, you can see that I've got my foundations here. They're showing up in purple. Now the reason that some of those things are not actually showing up is because they're below a slab or something, an element that is covering them up, and that's why you're seeing those dotted lines designating that they're hidden there, so they're not coming up as shaded for the whole thing, they're showing up as dotted lines. So sometimes it's just the line work that gets colorized, and sometimes it is the entire element that'll get colorized. So Tim, did I miss anything that you wanted to show? I think I hit all of our topics, but
I think you did awesome. But I will say, so you mentioned kind of zooming in, and I will say both in 3D and in 2D, we really tried to enhance the navigation capability. So you do have, Kris showed it a few times, the zoom to extent, but you do now have, if you double click on any object in 2D or in 3D, you'll zoom right to it. So if you're trying to go find something or jump into a particular object, if you're at, let's say, the whole sheet level, and you want to jump right to that object, just double click and it'll take you right there. Otherwise, I think you hit absolutely everything, Kris, and that was excellent.
Thanks for having me, and I appreciate you guys kind of continuing to push the product forward. I think this is a pretty big step in a good direction, and I'm really excited to see how my guys in my pre-con group really grab onto it, and how it really hopefully amps up our usage.